The chandeliers above shimmered with gold light, casting long reflections on the polished marble floors of the Grand Haven Event Center in Manhattan. Beneath those lights, people in glittering gowns and tailored tuxedos floated from one conversation to another, their laughter echoing through the cavernous hall. Waiters in white gloves glided silently between tables, offering flutes of champagne and trays of hors d'oeuvres no one would remember the next morning. And far from the spotlight, inside the shadows where the light never lingered, moved Michael Turner. At 45 years old, Michael had mastered the art of being invisible. Clad in a plain navy uniform and worn-out sneakers, he swept discarded napkins from under tables, wiped wine stains from glass surfaces, and discreetly replaced full trash bags without anyone ever noticing he was there. His hair, once thick and dark, had started to gray at the edges. His posture, once proud, had curved into a slight hunch, shaped by years of work, and even more by memories too heavy to carry upright. To those who passed by him, if they noticed at all, Michael was just the janitor, a man defined by what he did, not who he was. In their eyes, he was a background presence, a fixture, no different than the mop in his hand or the wheels on his cleaning cart. But Michael had a secret. Each night, after the last guest had left and the music had faded into the walls, he would take a moment before beginning the final sweep. He would walk to the center of the now-empty dance floor, stand perfectly still, and close his eyes. In that silence, the sounds of forgotten life would flood back. The rhythm of a waltz, the warmth of stage lights, the crowd's roar. He would lift one foot, pivot gently on the other, and let his body move, just for a few seconds, in a memory that still lived inside his muscles. No one had seen him dance in over 20 years, not since the injury, but he hadn't forgotten. His body hadn't forgotten. That part of him remained intact, even if the world had long since stopped asking what he was capable of. Each night, after that brief ritual, he would return to his cart, pick up the mop, and continue as if nothing had happened. Because in this place, he wasn't a dancer. He was just a man who made the floors shine again. The Grand Haven was no ordinary venue. It hosted the elite, celebrities, politicians, billionaires with too much money and not enough sincerity. Michael had seen them all. The faces changed every week, but their mannerisms never did. Arrogant, dismissive, uninterested in anyone outside their orbit. They ordered caviar and champagne like it meant something. They tipped poorly and laughed loudly. And yet, Michael never spoke ill of them. He observed, absorbed, and remembered, a quiet historian of excess and vanity. Every laugh, every insult, every careless toss of glass. He filed them away with the same care he used to polish the floors. No one ever wondered where he went after work. No one asked about his past. That suited Michael just fine. The less they knew, the less they could use against him. His small apartment in Queens was modest but clean. Photos were sparse. A faded one of his parents, a black and white himself in a tailored suit, frozen mid-leap during a performance from another life. On the shelf above his bed sat a single trophy, the nameplate half scratched off, its once golden surface dulled by time. He never spoke of that life, not because he was ashamed, but because it hurt too much to remember. Once, he had trained 6 hours a day, traveled the world, danced in Paris and Prague, won hearts in Tokyo and Buenos Aires. But one misstep, one torn ligament, and everything collapsed. Offers disappeared. Calls stopped. The pain in his knee became chronic, then constant. By the time he realized the world had moved on, it was too late to catch up. So he faded away, into side jobs, quiet corners, and finally into the solitude of janitorial work. It paid enough to live, and it asked nothing of his pride. But deep down, something inside him still burned. A tiny flicker, not quite extinguished. Every turn of the mop, every sweep of the broom. It wasn't just cleaning. It was a ritual, a penance, a preparation for something he couldn't name. And though the world didn't see him anymore, though the glittering guests passed him like he was air, Michael Turner never truly disappeared. He waited for the moment when someone might look past the uniform and the mop, waited for a sign that perhaps, just perhaps, his story wasn't finished after all. The week passed in its usual rhythm, with Michael moving to the shadows of Grand Haven, restoring order after chaos. But something about the upcoming Saturday evening buzzed differently through the corridors. He could feel it in the air. The staff spoke with excitement and tension. Something big was planned, more important than usual. And Michael knew that meant more glitter, more arrogance, more of everything that made him want to disappear into the walls. The guest of honor was Charles Delaney, a man with too much charm and far too much money, a media mogul, a lover of spectacles, and known provocateur in New York's elite circles. Every event he touched became a performance, and tonight was no different. The gala was set to raise money for a vague but noble-sounding cause. Cameras were expected. Influencers had RSVP'd. There were whispers of celebrity appearances. Michael arrived an hour before the guests, as always, dressed in his uniform, pushing his cart with quiet precision to the side entrance. The ballroom was already gleaming, thanks to his work the night before. Still, he double-checked every corner, every reflection in the glass, every line on the floor. Perfection was not a request in his world. It was the expectation. As the orchestra warmed up and the catering staff made last-minute adjustments, Michael settled into his invisible place, near the edge of the room, behind a marble column, mop in hand, back straight. The lights dimmed slightly as the first guests began to arrive, their laughter echoing in clusters of perfume and polished shoes. Hours passed. Speeches were made. Toasts were offered. The music flowed like honey, and the wine even more so. Michael kept his routine, collecting discarded napkins, adjusting overturned chairs, always just out of sight. His presence was a ghost, felt only when needed, never acknowledged. And then it happened. Charles Delaney took the microphone, stepping onto the small stage near the center of the ballroom. He raised his glass, commanding immediate silence. His tuxedo fit like it had been stitched onto him. His smile was the kind that never reached the eyes. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice rich and confident. "Thank you for coming. Tonight, we've raised nearly $1.5 million for our beloved arts programs, which means we can all pat ourselves on the back for being rich and generous." Polite laughter followed, and Michael, from his post, kept moving. "But I want to propose something a little different this evening," Charles continued, eyes gleaming with mischief. "A little entertainment, inspired by tonight's theme of elegance and grace." Michael froze, not because he expected what came next, but because he had seen this look before, the glint in the eye of a man who loved an audience more than he loved truth. Charles pointed toward the edge of the room, where Michael stood, just barely visible. "Our janitor here. What's your name again, sir?" he asked, as if this were casual conversation and not a performance. The microphone was still in his hand. The room turned. Dozens of eyes found Michael, many for the first time. He hesitated, the sudden attention hitting him like a wave of cold water. "Michael," he said finally, voice flat but steady. "Well, Michael," Charles grinned, "I have a proposition for you. Since we've all enjoyed a bit of dancing tonight, how about a friendly challenge?" He turned back to the crowd, raising his eyebrows like a magician about to reveal a trick. "If our janitor here can waltz better than I can, I'll personally clean this entire ballroom at the end of the night." Laughter exploded. A ripple of surprise, amusement, and mockery. Michael did not move. Someone clapped. Another whistled. A few guests cheered half-heartedly, already assuming the joke would end with Michael politely declining. No one actually expected a response. Charles gave a theatrical bow, extending one hand toward the dance floor. "What do you say, Michael? Care to show us your moves?" More laughter. The moment stretched. Michael's jaw tightened. He said nothing. The air around him felt thick, heavy with judgment and expectation. He stared at Charles, unblinking. Then, slowly, he turned away, returning to his duties without a word. The crowd chuckled again, this time with more discomfort than amusement. Charles, caught off guard by the lack of reaction, forced a laugh and waved the moment away like it had been a light-hearted game all along. "Ah, maybe next time," he said. "I suppose dignity still exists in some corners of the world." The orchestra resumed. The dance floor filled again. The moment passed for them, but not for Michael. In the shadows, his hands moved with mechanical precision, but his mind burned. The laughter, the spotlight, the condescension, it dug deep, not because of pride, but because of what it echoed. A time when he had stood under real spotlights, not mock ones. A time when applause had meant something. A time when he was seen. Later that night, long after the last guest had gone, Michael returned to the center of the floor. The echo of music still lingered in the corners of the ceiling. He stood where Charles had stood. The memory of the microphone, the laughter, still sharp. He didn't move, didn't dance. He just stared at the floor and let the silence say everything. Back in the staff hallway, Alyssa, one of the newest waitresses, had been watching from the edge. Young, sharp-eyed, and more attentive than most, she had noticed a moment unfold. She hadn't laughed. She hadn't joined the applause. She had simply watched. As Michael passed her on his way to the service closet, she met his gaze. "That wasn't funny," she said quietly. Michael didn't answer, but her words lingered more than the laughter ever could. That night, alone in his apartment, Michael sat on the edge of his bed. The trophy on the shelf seemed to gleam just slightly in the city's glow. His knee ached, as it always did, but the pain felt different now. Not physical, not completely. For the first time in years, he didn't close his eyes and imagine dancing. He imagined answering. He imagined walking up to the stage, taking the microphone, and giving them something they would never forget. But dreams, like memories, often fade with the morning. And Michael Turner, for all his fire, knew better than to confuse imagination with reality. Still, something had changed. He just didn't know it yet. The following evening, the Grand Haven was nearly empty. Only the soft whirring of vacuums and the occasional clinking of dishes echoed through the high-ceiling halls. The aftermath of the gala had left its usual trail. Half-full glasses, glitter in the carpet, and the smell of spilled wine mingling with expensive perfume. Michael worked in silence, as he always did, his movements deliberate, methodical. But something about him tonight was different, slower, more withdrawn. He moved past the table where Charles Delaney had stood, where the mockery had unfolded. The stain of that moment wasn't visible, but it clung to the air like smoke. Michael refused to look at the spot directly, but his body avoided it instinctively, veering slightly to the left each time he passed. In the far corner of the ballroom, Alyssa was stacking empty champagne flutes into crates, her ponytail bouncing lightly with each movement. She'd seen Michael enter earlier, had wanted to say something. All day she had thought about his face during the gala, the way his shoulders had tensed but never slumped, the silence he had chosen instead of confrontation. It bothered her, not just the way he'd been treated, but the way no one seemed to care. She finished her task and made her way across the room, her footsteps muffled against the plush carpet. Michael was bent over a tipped chair, adjusting its position against a long dining table. "I saw what happened last night," she said quietly. Michael didn't look up. "Did you?" "I did," she said, "and I didn't think it was funny." He straightened, glanced at her, then returned to his work. "It's nothing. It's forgotten." She crossed her arms. "Doesn't feel like nothing. And I don't think you've forgotten." Michael exhaled through his nose, a sound too tired to be a sigh. He looked at her again, more fully this time. "Why does it matter to you?" "Because I've worked here 3 months, and I've never seen you lose your composure. Not once. Not even when people ignore you. Not even when they leave a mess right in front of you. But last night, something hit you. Hard." Michael turned back to his cart, fiddled with a spray bottle, then said, "Don't make the mistake of caring too much about people you work beside. This place eats kindness." "I'm not being kind," Alyssa replied. "I'm being curious, and maybe a little pissed off." That earned the smallest smile from Michael, brief but real. He shook his head, then walked toward a large window overlooking the city. Alyssa followed. "You move like a dancer," she said softly. Michael froze, his hand resting on the window frame. "Excuse me, when that guy spilled a glass near you last week, I saw how you shifted, how you caught the edge of the table and turned your body. It was too smooth. Reflexes like that don't just happen." He didn't answer. "So I started digging," she added, voice quieter now. "I didn't find much. Just a name, Michael Turner. Competitive ballroom, early 90s. A few regional awards. Then nothing." Michael's jaw tightened. That was a long time ago. But it's you, isn't it? He didn't deny it. Alyssa stepped closer, her voice lowering to a near whisper. You were good, really good. I found a video, grainy footage. But even in black and white, you stood out. You had presence. He turned from the window slowly, as if reluctant to pull himself from a place far away. It doesn't matter now. That man on the tape, he died a long time ago. Alyssa frowned. What happened? Michael hesitated, then walked to a nearby chair and sat down, his movements careful, one hand resting on his right knee. Injury, he said. Torn ligament. Meniscus shattered. Surgery gave me mobility, not ability. By the time I could walk without pain, the circuit had moved on. New names, new faces. I tried to re-enter, but his voice faded. He rubbed the side of his knee absent-mindedly. You stopped dancing. No, he corrected. I stopped being seen. A long silence settled between them. Outside the window, the city lights flickered like embers. Alyssa didn't press him further. Instead, she sat across from him, leaning forward on her elbows. I get it, she said. Not the dancing part, but the vanishing part. I studied to be a photographer. Spent 2 years chasing internships. Got one, lost it to someone with better connections. Took a side job to pay rent. That was 18 months ago. Michael gave a soft nod. Life has a way of doing that. But the thing is, Alyssa continued, I don't think you ever really let it go. Otherwise, that joke wouldn't have hit you so hard. He didn't respond. Have you danced at all since then? She asked. Michael glanced at his knee. A few steps, mostly muscle memory, but never in public, never in front of people. Why not? Because I'd rather be forgotten than pitted. The words fell like iron between them. Alyssa leaned back, absorbing them. Then, after a pause, she said, what if it wasn't about pity? What if it was about dignity? Michael studied her. There was no pity in her eyes. No romanticized notion of comeback stories. Just curiosity, honesty, maybe even a little challenge. He stood, adjusting his jacket. Even if I wanted to, it's not that simple. The body remembers. But it also reminds. This knee, it would never forgive me. Maybe it doesn't have to, she said. Maybe it just needs a reason. He looked at her, unsure whether to laugh or sigh. Later that night, as the building emptied and silence reclaimed the halls, Michael lingered on the dance floor. He didn't close his eyes this time. Instead, he looked at his reflection in the polished surface below, then turned slowly, letting one foot glide. A simple rotation. Pain flared, sharp, immediate, but he didn't stop. Another step, slower, more deliberate. He didn't dance. Not truly, but he moved. And for the first time in years, he let himself remember not just the stage, but the feeling, the thrill, the control, the surrender to rhythm. Alyssa, watching from the doorway, said nothing. She simply watched. She had seen the spark flicker. Now, she wanted to see it ignite. The laughter from the gala had long faded, but its echo remained. In the days that followed, the story of the janitor and the mogul's challenge spread among staff and patrons alike. Some told it as a harmless joke, a moment of levity in an otherwise pretentious evening. Others, those who had noticed the tension in Michael's silence, spoke of it in hushed tones, as if the act had crossed an invisible line. Either way, people were talking, and Michael could feel the shift. He didn't walk the halls of Grand Haven the same way anymore. His steps were just as measured, his uniform just as clean, but something underneath had altered. A quiet weight pressed against his spine, one that no amount of sweeping could dislodge. He found himself watching reflections in the glass more often, checking his posture, his stance. Not to admire, but to evaluate, to measure what was left. By the third day, the cleaning staff had caught wind of Charles Delaney's intentions. Word had spread that he was planning to host another gala. Soon, and repeat the stunt, only this time with even more flair. A proper stage, a full introduction, a spotlight waiting to land squarely on Michael's shoulders whether he accepted or not. Michael heard the rumor from Calvin, one of the night security guards. They'd worked the same shift for years, exchanging little more than nods and routine hallway chatter. "He's got something planned, man," Calvin said as they shared a late-night coffee break near the loading dock. Said something about a showdown in front of his donors. "People are expecting it now. He's turning it into a bit." Michael stared at his cup, then let them laugh. "You really gonna let him do that to you again? What difference does it make? I keep my head down. I do my job. That's always been enough." Calvin tilted his head, studying him. "Was it enough before last week?" Michael didn't answer. Back inside, Alyssa had been preparing her own quiet campaign. She had begun asking the other servers and back-of-house workers about Michael, what they knew, what they remembered. She wasn't looking for scandal. She was trying to understand a man behind the silence. And in between folded napkins and wipe counters, she discovered small pieces, hints. A few remembered seeing him move differently, carry himself like someone who used to stand on stages. One even recalled, years ago, a night when the lights had malfunctioned during a rehearsal, and Michael had helped the choreographer mark the floor. His steps, they said, had looked too precise for a janitor. Alyssa didn't confront Michael immediately. She waited until they were alone again, this time in the service hallway where crates of decorations were stored. She cornered him, gently, as he was organizing supplies. "I heard Charles is planning to do it again," she said. Michael nodded without looking up. "So I've been told." "Will you let him?" "What would you have me do? Challenge him to a duel? My days of grand entrances are over." "I'm not talking about spectacle," she said. "I'm talking about not letting someone make you small just to get a laugh. There's a difference." He turned to her. "You think standing in front of those people will make me big again? That a few steps on the floor I used to own will erase everything I've lost?" "I think you haven't lost as much as you think," she replied. "And I think you're scared that if you try again and fail, then it really will be over." Michael flinched just slightly. Alyssa took a breath. "He's turning you into a story. One where you don't get to write your part. You can let him do that. Or you can step into the light and remind everyone you're more than what they see." He didn't respond, but something in his face, the tension in his jaw, the flare of his nostrils, betrayed that the words had landed where they were meant to. That night, alone in his apartment, Michael sat in the dark with his trophy in his hands. The nameplate was almost unreadable now, but the memory wasn't. He remembered the night he had won it, the applause, the partner whose eyes had met his with such certainty, the thrill of being fully alive in motion. He set the trophy down and stood. In the middle of the living room, he cleared the space and began to stretch. The pain was immediate, but not unbearable. He moved slowly, deliberately, testing the old routines, not the elaborate spins and lifts, but the foundations, posture, frame, breath, balance. He felt like a machine long out of use, dusted off but not yet oiled. Still, his body responded, tentatively, stubbornly, but it responded. 2 nights later, as he cleaned the floor of the Rosewood Lounge, a smaller hall within the Grand Haven, he stopped near the center. Alyssa, who had remained behind to help, turned off the last set of lights. A soft glow remained from the hallway. Michael cleared his throat. "Play something." Alyssa blinked. "Now." He nodded. "Just something slow." She pulled out her phone, selected a Waltz instrumental she'd saved days ago, just in case. The music filled the empty space gently, a cascade of violins and piano. Michael took a step forward, then another, and then, with a breath, he let go of the years. He moved, not with the flair or precision of his youth, but with grace, aged and heavy but present. Each step was deliberate, filled with a kind of dignity that only years of silence can shape. Alyssa watched from the edge, eyes wide, heart pounding. She saw not just a man dancing. She saw someone reclaiming space. He didn't last long, less than 2 minutes. His knee trembled, and he had to stop, breathing hard. But he stood tall, taller than she'd ever seen him. She approached slowly. "You're not done." He looked at her, sweat on his brow, pain in his gaze, but also defiance. "No," he said, "not yet." The following morning, Tucked beneath his locker door, Michael found a letter. Elegant stationery. Gold trim. The sender was unmistakable. Charles Delaney. Inside, the message was short, friendly, almost absurd in its politeness. A cordial invitation. A light-hearted waltz at the upcoming gala. A chance to dazzle the crowd. Should you outshine me, I'll personally clean the entire venue. A promise sealed in jest and in public honor. Michael read the letter twice, then folded it carefully and slid it into his pocket. When Alyssa found him later, he handed it to her without a word. She read it, then looked up. You know what this is? Yes. He thinks it's a game. Michael nodded, and I've decided to let him play. The official invitation changed everything. It arrived with pomp and polish, printed on ivory cardstock, sealed with a deep red wax emblem. While the message inside was wrapped in the language of civility and jest, the intent was clear. Charles Delaney wasn't extending a simple challenge. He was staging a spectacle, and Michael Turner had just become the centerpiece. The gala was scheduled the following Saturday night, less than 10 days away. The invitation promised an unforgettable evening of elegance, generosity, and surprise performances. On the guest list were major donors, city officials, and a few names Michael recognized from magazine covers. Charles had done what he did best: transformed mockery into theater, coated in charm and the illusion of friendly banter. But beneath the pageantry, the stakes were real. The challenge had been issued publicly now. Not just a joke whispered across a microphone, but a featured attraction in one of the most anticipated charity events of the season. Social media accounts linked to Grand Haven hinted at a dance duel with an unexpected twist. Event posters showed silhouettes twirling in the glow of chandeliers, with the tagline, "When elegance meets the unexpected." Michael hadn't responded. Not yet, but the city already expected a performance. Backstage, tension rippled through the service staff. Some rolled their eyes, believing the entire ordeal ridiculous. Others whispered support, especially those who had worked beside Michael for years without ever truly seeing him. Alyssa, however, was relentless. She began to act as his quiet confidant and, more than that, his advocate. "I hope you realize what this means," she said to Michael during a break in the service hallway, where the scent of floor polish lingered under flickering lights. "I know exactly what it means," he replied. "It means stepping into something I never planned to return to. It means risking public failure, or worse, pity. It means showing them they don't get to define you," Alyssa countered. "It means doing something on your terms, even if it's uncomfortable." He watched her carefully. "This isn't about revenge. I know. It's about dignity. Yours. And theirs, too, even if they don't know it yet." Michael didn't train like he once had. His body couldn't take it. Instead, he prepared in fragments, stretching at home, moving through simple routines in quiet rooms, listening to old waltz pieces in the early morning hours before the city awoke. Each movement brought pain, but also clarity. His body, though changed, still remembered, and in the remembering, it found rhythm. Alyssa arranged for him to use one of the smaller private salons at Grand Haven during the off hours. A carpet was pulled back. A mirror leaned against the wall. No one else knew, or if they did, they didn't interfere. In that room, Michael was not the janitor. He was a man he had buried long ago. 3 days before the gala, a member of the Delaney event team stopped by the lounge with a clipboard and a rehearsed smile. She introduced herself as Camille and informed Michael, with theatrical politeness, that his friendly performance had been scheduled between the keynote speaker and the dinner service. "There will be a short introduction," she explained, flipping through her notes. "Mr. Delaney will begin with a brief solo, just a minute or two. Then you'll enter and join for the remainder of the piece. The idea is spontaneity. The crowd will love surprise." Michael said nothing at first. He studied her, the way her tone attempted to flatten the humiliation into a casual flourish. Her smile faltered slightly under his gaze. "And if I decline?" he asked calmly. "Oh," she hesitated. "Well, that would be unfortunate. A few announcements have already been made. Expectations are high. It's all in good fun, of course." "Of course," he said. She handed him a small envelope, his official performance card. He accepted it, not out of agreement, but out of finality. This was no longer hypothetical. That evening, as Michael stood alone in the back corridor of Grand Haven, he held the card between his fingers. His name was printed there. No title, no honorific, just a name, beneath the word special guest appearance. He couldn't help but smirk at the irony. The following night, he met with Alyssa in the private salon again. She had brought a pair of dress shoes, not new, but polished and clean. She handed them to him like a quiet offering. "They're a little loose," she admitted. "Borrowed them from wardrobe, but they should work." Michael took them, sat on the edge of the mirror stand, and slid them on. The weight felt unfamiliar. Formal shoes used to be second nature to him. Now, they felt like armor. "Thank you," he said quietly. She nodded. "Do you want to rehearse with a partner?" He looked up. "You?" "I know the steps. I took ballroom in college. Just enough not to embarrass myself." He hesitated, then stood. "Lead or follow?" She smiled. "Your story, your lead." They moved slowly, cautiously at first. Michael's body was still adjusting to trust. Trusting the joint. Trusting the rhythm. Trusting the mirror not to reflect someone else. But as the music played and their feet found the count, something shifted. Alyssa followed him with ease, offering subtle support when his balance faltered, adjusting her pace to his strength. They danced not with showmanship, but with presence. When the music ended, they stood in silence. "You're ready," she said. "I'm not sure that matters." "It does. You're not doing this to win. You're doing it to remind them who you are." He nodded, unsure whether he believed her fully, but grateful all the same. On the morning of the gala, a courier delivered a second letter to Michael's apartment. This one bore Charles Delaney's personal seal and was handwritten. "Michael, looking forward to our little dance. I admire your courage in accepting. It takes a rare man to find grace and humility. I'll see you under the lights. Bring your best. Warmly, Charles." Michael read the note once, then folded it and placed it in the trash. That night, he arrived early at Grand Haven. The building shimmered under golden lighting. Valets bustled outside. Inside, the ballroom had been transformed into a palace of excess. Floral arrangements spilled across every table, and a crystal chandelier hung lower than usual, as if to capture the mood of opulence. Michael entered through the staff corridor, just as he always had. But tonight, something was different. He wasn't invisible. A few of the younger servers nodded to him. Someone whispered his name. Alyssa met him backstage with calm expression and handed him a jacket. Dark, simple, tailored just enough to fit. He put it on slowly. The floor crew handed him a cue card with his entrance mark. A violinist rehearsed a phrase just out of tune, and someone adjusted the lights one last time. The energy in the room was rising, and Michael Turner, for the first time in decades, was about to step back into the light. The night of the gala arrived. The Grand Haven dazzled as never before. Chandeliers exploded with crystal light. Tables were draped in silk white, and florals spilled like colorful waterfalls onto every surface. A hush of anticipation filled the air, punctuated by distant laughter and the clinking of champagne glasses. Cameramen hovered in shadows, capturing rehearsed chaos with practiced ease. Backstage, Michael's heartbeat thudded against his ribs. He felt the weight of every whispered expectation pressing into his chest. He stood in his dark jacket. Dress shoes fitted snugly now, his body humming with readiness. His gaze flicked to the doorway where Charles Delaney emerged in a perfect tuxedo, perfect posture, perfect smirk. Alyssa stood beside him, silent support in her eyes. She offered a firm nod. It was enough. Moments later, Camille, the event coordinator, peeked in. "Okay, Mr. Turner," she whispered, voice clipped. "You're on in 1 minute. Mr. Delaney will start with the intro. Then you join. Cue is his third step." She checked her watch. No pressure. Michael inhaled, tasting dust and polished wood in his lungs. He nodded, stepping toward the stage entrance as orchestra's opening notes drifted through the velvet curtains. On the ballroom floor, Charles appeared under a spotlight. The camera followed him. He smiled out into the audience, a mixture of affluent donors, celebrities with guarded faces, and a few curious innocents. He lifted his hand, greeting them with practiced ease. Michael slipped onto the floor beside him, halfway hidden in a fold of the curtain. His pulse settled into rhythm with the strings. The orchestra played a delicate waltz. Charles moved first, confident, practiced. Each step measured, designed to draw the eye and the applause. For a moment, Michael was a shadow behind him, tethered to the drama unfolding. Then he stepped out. His entrance was quiet. No flourish. Yet something shifted. The crowd's energy altered, as if a new current had entered the room. Charles's smile caught. His partner's grin faltered. Michael moved with restraint, each foot deliberate, each turn controlled. His knee flared but did not falter. He glided forward until he faced Charles. The music peaked. The audience held its breath. 4/4 bars, Michael mirrored Charles's steps. No showboating, only presence. When Charles spun lightly, Michael mirrored with quiet precision. When Charles extended his arm, Michael responded with a grace born of muscle memory and long-suppressed desire. Then Charles faltered, a moment's hesitation. His smile cracked. Michael saw it. He stepped forward, not to overshadow, not outshine, just to be seen, undeniable. The movement was simple, elegant. The floor beneath him accepted him like a long-lost friend. And then someone sabotaged the lights. The chandelier shifted slightly. The lights flickered. Thousands of dollars of tech hiccuped. Gasps rippled. The orchestra wavered off tempo, the crescendo faltering. Michael froze for a heartbeat, searching the lights above, unsure whether it was intentional or technical glitch. Meanwhile, Charles's partner stumbled, her heel catching the parquet. She faltered, touched to the floor. Laughter. It crackled in the sudden darkness, like a blade against glass. But Michael didn't break. He held position. Steady calm. Even as the note splintered, he remained. A spotlight reeled alive. Not at his feet, but on the cracked frame of the chandelier. Wires showed. Sparks hissed. An electrical buzz droned. Security shouted. Mousy young attendants scurried. Guests murmured. Michael took a breath. The music resumed, muted and tense. He took one step, then another. Charles, thrown off, ended his dance with a shaky bow. Michael embraced the rhythm that remained. He moved, not elegantly, not showily, but earnestly. Each step was a message. I am here. I have not been erased. A tremor ran up the chandelier. A crystal broke. It clattered onto the floor. Silence. Then applause. It started hesitantly. A single hand. Then two. Then the entire hall erupted. Charles stood, eyes wide. He looked at Michael, not with shock, but something like wonder and perhaps regret. Michael's knee burned. Sweat tracked down his back. Yet he lifted his chin. The orchestra found its resolve and carried the music forward. But now, Michael led. His steps slowed, careful. The audience watched every stubborn pulse of muscle, every tremor he resisted. When the music ended, the applause was thunderous. Michael bowed from the waist. He did not smile. He could not. But there was triumph in his stillness, in his bare existence at that moment. Charles descended from the stage. He approached Michael, slowly, an unfamiliar humility in his gait. Michael, he said, voice softer than before. You dance beautifully. Michael nodded. Charles nodded back. The chandeliers hummed. The lights buzzed in uneasy harmony. But the floor beneath Michael felt firm, real. Alyssa slipped onto the stage and stood beside Michael. She did not need to speak. Her presence said what words could not. The staff emerged, dispersed through the room, watching. The guests stood, many wiping tears. Michael took a final breath. It was not victory over Charles. It was reclamation of himself. Beyond the lights and the applause, something had shifted. The man who had been invisible now existed in their memory, not as spectacle, but as story. The sabotage had aimed to break him. Instead, it revealed him. And for that moment, he stood unclothed by the past, visible, strong, undeniably alive. The next morning, the ballroom was silent again. The echo of applause had faded, and the polished floors reflected only sunlight streaming through the tall windows. where hundreds had stood in only hours before, now remained only the quiet aftermath. Scattered programs, an overturned champagne flute, and the faint scent of perfume hanging in the air. Michael arrived early, dressed again in his janitor's uniform, pushing the cart with practiced ease. No spotlight greeted him this time. No cameras, just the routine he had known for years. But everything had changed. He approached the dance floor cautiously, pausing at the edge as though it were sacred ground. His hand touched the smooth surface, his fingers brushing where he had stood the night before. His body still ached, particularly his knee, which now reminded him with every step that there had been a cost of what he had done. Still, he didn't regret it. Not the pain, not the risk, not the scrutiny. For the first time in years, he had chosen to be seen, and the world had watched. As he knelt to pick up a fallen chair, the ballroom doors opened. Alyssa entered, carrying 2 cups of coffee and a folded newspaper tucked under one arm. She approached with her usual energy, though her eyes were sharper, more attentive. "You're famous," she said, offering him one of the coffees. Michael took it with a small nod. Doubtful, she opened the newspaper and spread it on a nearby table. Front page. Not the headline, but the lower column. The janitor who danced. An unexpected moment of grace at the Delaney Gala. They didn't use your name, but they mentioned everything else. Michael scanned the article. It described the gala in typical flair, the gowns, the guests, the opulence, but then took a turn, recounting the sudden shift in atmosphere when a member of the staff took the floor. It praised the courage of a man who had no reason to stand under the spotlight, and yet did, moving not with youthful agility, but with something deeper. Dignity, control, grace forged from hardship. He folded the paper slowly. They're romanticizing. Maybe, Alyssa said, but maybe they're just finally paying attention. They sat in silence for a few moments, sipping coffee as the city outside stirred to life. Then Alyssa glanced at him sideways. "I got a call this morning." Michael raised an eyebrow. "My friend Sarah. She runs a dance studio in Brooklyn. They saw the clip of you dancing. Someone in the audience recorded it and posted it last night. It's already been shared thousands of times. The studio wants to meet you, not for a performance, for a teaching position." Michael blinked. "That's absurd." She said it's a serious offer. "I haven't taught in over 20 years. Doesn't matter. They want someone who knows what it feels like to fight for something." He turned his gaze back to the floor. This wasn't a comeback. "I know," she said, "but it could be the start of something else." He didn't answer, and she didn't push further. That afternoon, as the cleaning crews moved through the venue, Michael remained mostly quiet. He worked steadily, nodding to staff who passed him with smiles they hadn't worn before. There was a newfound respect in the way they looked at him, not forced, not performative, but real. Even Camille, the event coordinator, approached with a hint of contrition. "Mr. Turner," she said, adjusting the clipboard against her chest. "I just wanted to say, thank you. Last night was unforgettable." He gave a polite nod. "Glad it made an impression." She hesitated, then added, "If you ever want to be part of our performance teams, even just choreography assistants, I'd be happy to connect you." Michael nearly smiled. "I'll consider it." Later that night, in the quiet of his apartment, Michael returned to his small living room. The shoes Alyssa had borrowed for him now sat beneath his chair, polished again. He picked them up, running a hand over the leather, and stared at them for a long time. He played the waltz again, the same one from the gala. He didn't dance. He just listened, letting the music fill the corners of his space like it had once filled theaters and studios. His eyes drifted to the window, where the city pulsed beyond the glass, the same city that had once cheered him, then forgotten him, and now seemed to remember. The next morning, Michael made his way to Brooklyn. The studio was on the second floor of an old brick building. The stairs creaked. The hallway smelled faintly of sweat and sawdust. When he entered, a woman in her 40s greeted him with a handshake and a kind smile. "Sarah, we don't usually reach out to potential instructors like this," she said as she led him down the hallway. But the clip, it was something else. Michael said little. He wasn't sure how to feel yet. Sarah opened the door to a large, sunlit studio. Hardwood floors, wall-length mirrors. A few students stretched quietly in the corner. She gestured toward the open space. We have a beginner's adult class in 30 minutes. If you want to observe or even lead a warm-up, you're welcome to. He stood for a moment, looking at the studio. It felt both familiar and distant, like revisiting a childhood home that had been painted over, but still held the echoes of old laughter. "I'll watch," he said. And he did. He watched as women and men, all ages, all shapes, struggled through steps, laughed at their missteps, clapped when someone completed a turn. He noticed how they moved, not with precision, but with hope. They weren't trying to be perfect. They were trying to feel something. When the instructor gestured toward him near the end, inviting him to demonstrate a simple turn, Michael hesitated only for a moment. Then he stepped forward. He moved slowly, guiding a pair through the basic steps of a box waltz. His voice was calm, steady. He corrected gently, encouraged without praise. By the end of the session, they were smiling, not because they had improved, but because he had made them feel like they could. After class, Sarah approached him. "We'd love to have you." Michael looked at the room again, at the floor, at the faces still glowing with energy. He nodded. That night, as he walked home through the dusky streets of Brooklyn, he passed a storefront with an old mirror in the window. He stopped, looked at himself, not at his uniform, not at the tired lines around his eyes, but at the man standing tall, the man who had taken the first step. The studio became a quiet refuge. Every week, Michael found himself spending more time inside its mirrored walls. What began as a few warm-up demonstrations gradually turned into co-teaching, and soon, Sarah gave him his own beginner's class. Adults from across the city, nurses, teachers, retirees, and desk-bound dreamers filled the room, their movements clumsy but determined. They weren't dancers in the traditional sense, but they brought something to the floor that Michael had long forgotten: joy without judgment. Alyssa joined occasionally, first as a helper, then as the studio's new coordinator. Her organizational skills paired naturally with Michael's calm instruction. Where he brought rhythm and method, she brought warmth and fire. Together, they created something rare, a space where people felt safe to try, to fail, and to try again. It had been nearly 3 weeks since the gala. Michael hadn't returned to Grand Haven, except to collect a final paycheck. He declined an offer from the board to consult on future event performances, politely but firmly. The chapter was closed, or so he thought. But the past, even when left behind, has a way of returning through the side door. One Monday morning, Sarah entered the studio office with a concerned look. "There's a call for you," she said. "Someone from the New York Arts Council. They saw the gala clip, and your name was brought up at a recent board meeting. Apparently, you're being considered for an honorary performance at the State Theater this winter, a tribute to legacy dancers." Michael stared at her. "I'm not a legacy." She tilted her head. "That's not up to you to decide. I'm not ready for that kind of spotlight again." Sarah handed him a note with the council contact. "Then say no, but don't ignore it." He folded the paper without reading it. The idea of stepping onto a major stage, even for something symbolic, twisted his stomach. He hadn't danced a full routine in years. His body could handle short demonstrations, yes, but the kind of movement required for a performance of that scale? That was a different question entirely. Later that night, the studio was quieter than usual. Rain tapped gently against the high windows as Michael moved through a solo practice. The room smelled of wood polish and sweat. He had been working on a sequence from an old waltz routine, one he hadn't dared to attempt in over a decade. His feet knew the steps before his mind remembered them. For a few moments, it felt like time had stilled. Then it happened. As he turned on his supporting leg, his right knee twisted. Not just a twinge, but a sharp, immediate bolt of pain that buckled his body without warning. He collapsed onto the floor hard, the wooden boards knocking against his ribs. A gasp escaped him, one hand clutching his knee as his breath came in short, shallow bursts. Alyssa was at his side within seconds. "Don't move," she said quickly, crouching beside him. "Talk to me. Where does it hurt?" Michael grit his teeth. "Knee. Same one. Something tore, I felt it." "Okay, breathe. Just breathe. Sarah called for an ambulance, and within minutes, Michael was being wheeled out into the cold night. The ride was short, but the silence between him and Alyssa felt endless. In the emergency room, X-rays were taken, questions were asked, and eventually a soft-spoken doctor entered the room with a chart and furrowed brow. "Mr. Turner," he began, "it looks like you've suffered a partial ligament tear on top of some pre-existing scar tissue. It's not catastrophic, but it will require rest, possibly surgery, depending on how the recovery begins." Michael closed his eyes. "How long?" "Minimum 2 months off the leg. No strain. If you opt for the surgery, maybe longer." Alyssa sat beside him, her expression unreadable. The doctor added, "You're lucky it wasn't worse, but you need to take this seriously. If you push yourself too soon, the damage could be permanent." Back at the apartment, silence returned. Michael sat in the dark, leg elevated, wrapped in thick gauze. The painkillers dulled the edge, but not the weight in his chest. The same weight he had carried years ago, the same voice whispering, "It's over again." Alyssa brought him tea, sat beside him on the couch, and didn't speak until he did. "I should have known better," he muttered. "No," she said softly. "You trusted your body. You trusted your hope. I'm not built for comebacks. Not anymore. You weren't trying to come back. You were trying to live again." He looked at her, bitterness lacing his voice. "And look where that got me." She didn't flinch. "You danced again. You taught. You inspired people. You showed the world that pain doesn't erase talent, that time doesn't erase spirit." Michael leaned back, eyes fixed on the ceiling. "What if this is it? Then you teach from a chair, or from memory, or from rhythm. But you don't disappear again, Michael. You don't get to vanish twice." For the first time since the fall, tears came. Not from pain, but from the cruel familiarity of it all. The loss, the fear, the anger, but behind it, something steadier, not resignation, something like resilience. The next morning, Michael returned to the studio, in a wheelchair. Sarah and the students greeted him with open arms, their concern genuine, but their respect unshaken. He taught from the sidelines, voice firm, corrections precise. And when one student stumbled, Michael clapped once and said, "Again," stepped through the error. The room laughed gently, and the lesson continued. Weeks passed. His knee remained swollen, but the fire within him didn't dim. He adapted, modified routines, focused on rhythm, posture, musicality. Students began calling him Coach, a nickname he pretended to grumble about but secretly liked. One afternoon, as Alyssa helped him lock the studio doors, he asked, "What did the council say?" "They're still waiting." He looked out at the street. "Tell them I'll do it." She smiled. "Solo with a partner?" "With a partner," he said, "but not the way they expect." She raised an eyebrow. "Not for spectacle," he said, "for story." Winter settled over the city like a thick, silver blanket. The streets sparkled with frost, and every breath turned visible in the cold morning air. Inside the Brooklyn dance studio, however, warmth thrived, not just from the heating vents or the worn wooden floor beneath the students' feet, but from the pulse of something alive again, momentum, energy, purpose. Michael had returned to teaching full-time, even as he continued physical therapy on his knee. The swelling had gone down, though mobility remained limited. Some days were better than others, but he had adapted. He taught from a high stool now, watching his students move while guiding them with his voice, hands, and the occasional tap of a cane. At first, he hated it, hated the limitations, hated needing help, but gradually, something softened. He began to accept that authority didn't come from demonstration. It came from presence. What Michael never admitted out loud, however, was that the upcoming performance at the State Theater weighed on him like a storm cloud. The invitation had been confirmed, the date set. It wasn't a gala, not another Delaney-style spectacle. This was different. A celebration of legacy dancers. A curated night of tributes and short pieces. Michael's name had been listed among others. Some he hadn't heard in years. Others he'd only known from old program booklets. He hadn't told most of his students. Only Alyssa and Sarah knew. He didn't want praise or pity. He wanted the work to speak, or not at all. His routine, however, remained incomplete. He couldn't perform the kind of choreography expected of a soloist, and he refused to let anyone else choreograph something flashy that would turn him into a symbol of triumph over adversity. That wasn't the point. He didn't want the audience to applaud his effort. He wanted them to see the truth in the movement, however simple. He wanted honesty. Alyssa watched him struggle with this, silently at first. Then, one afternoon, she came to him with an idea. What if he didn't dance alone? He looked up from his notes. You want me to bring in another retired professional? No, she said. I mean, what if I dance with you? He blinked. Alyssa, I'm not a stage dancer, I know, but we've worked together. I know your pacing. I know how you move. We could build something simple, something real. Michael hesitated. It's not just about knowing steps. There's connection, breath, timing. I know, she said, and we have that. He didn't speak for a moment. Then he nodded slowly. Something real, then no tricks, no lifts, no illusions, no costumes either, she added. Just music and story. They began rehearsing that same evening. After hours, when the studio was quiet, they would clear the floor, put on soft lighting, and work to the routine. It wasn't grand, no sweeping lifts, no spinning spotlights. Just a series of slow, intentional steps set to a haunting waltz, the kind that curled under the skin and pulled emotion from places words could never reach. The piece told a story, though no one watching would know it exactly. A man who had once danced alone, a woman who entered without noise or demand, the way they moved toward and away from one another, the pauses between gestures, the moment he stumbled, and she held his balance without overtaking him. The final turn, shared not in precision but in trust. The first time they made it through the routine without stopping, they stood in silence for a long moment afterward. You're ready? Alyssa said softly. Michael stared at the mirror. I'm not sure I ever will be. But this feels like the truth. 2 weeks later, the night arrived. The State Theater was no stranger to Michael. He had danced on that stage before, 2 decades earlier, in another life, with another name buzzing through the crowd. That time, his face had been on the program cover. This time, it was printed small near the bottom of the list. Michael Turner, interpretive waltz with guest partner. No details, no fanfare. The backstage hallway smelled the same, of dust, hairspray, and nerves. The stage crew moved briskly, preparing cues and light placements. Other performers rehearsed in side rooms. Michael sat quietly in the green room, dressed in a simple black suit. Alyssa wore a deep navy dress, elegant but unadorned. They didn't speak much. There was nothing to rehearse now, only the waiting. The cue came faster than expected. One performance ran short. A stagehand motioned them toward the wings. Alyssa squeezed his hand once. Michael stepped out into the shadow. Then the lights rose. The theater was full, hundreds of faces in the dark, some known, some not. The silence was immediate. No clapping, no announcer, just the music, soft and slow, rising like fog from the orchestra pit. Michael took his first step. His cane remained behind. The pain was still there, but manageable. He moved with caution, but not fear. Alyssa followed, joining him mid-stitch. The routine unfolded not like performance, but like a confession. Their movements were measured, tender. At one point, Michael lost a bit of balance. His knee flared with warning, and Alyssa responded without hesitation, adjusted her pace, offering him grounding without pulling him off center. The audience didn't cheer. They didn't whisper. They watched. Each step was filled with memory. Each pause carried weight. It wasn't about how well he danced, but about why he danced at all. When the music ended, Michael lowered his head slightly. Alyssa placed a hand on his shoulder. The silence held. Then the applause came, not explosive, not forced, but slowly, growing in waves. Genuine, respectful, not for perfection, for presence. Michael and Alyssa exited without taking a second bow. Backstage, no one said anything right away. A few dancers offered nods. One tech Crew members simply patted him on the back as he passed. Later that evening, as they walked back to the quiet Brooklyn streets, Alyssa asked, "Do you think they understood?" "I think," Michael said, "they felt something. That's enough." She smiled. "You know, they didn't see a janitor or a broken dancer. They saw a man who never stopped moving forward." Michael didn't answer. He didn't need to. He had danced not to reclaim the past, but to rewrite the silence. And in doing so, he had been seen. Finally, truly, without needing to be explained. 3 days after performance at the State Theater, Michael received a letter postmarked from a private Upper East Side address. It arrived without fanfare, tucked in a plain envelope, the handwriting crisp and exact. Inside was a single sheet of cream paper, bearing a message both brief and carefully worded. "Michael, I watched from the balcony. I had intended to stay silent, but silence no longer feels like the right answer. You were extraordinary. Respectfully, Charles Delaney." Michael read the note twice, not out of disbelief, but to absorb the strange clarity in Charles's tone. There was no joke hidden between the lines, no clever phrasing to blunt sincerity, just recognition, the kind that comes too late for applause, but right on time for closure. He tucked the letter into his desk drawer without further thought. That same morning, social media buzzed with clips of performance. Unlike the viral video from the gala, this one carried a different tone. There were no comments mocking his age or questioning his role. Instead, post praise of vulnerability, the restraint, the courage of returning to the stage without pretense. Some called it a quiet revolution in a culture obsessed with perfection. Others simply called it unforgettable. Alyssa was the first to read the article that sealed the shift. In the Sunday edition of The New Yorker, nestled between long essays and cultural reviews, an editorial appeared titled "The Way to Grace: Why Michael Turner's Return Mattered." Written by a respected critic known for his sharp tongue, the piece surprised everyone with its warmth. It recounted the story of the man who had disappeared from the spotlight, returned in humility, and redefined performance not through movement alone, but through meaning. The final line read, "He did not perform to reclaim what was lost, but to fulfill what was promised, not to others, but to himself." That line echoed in Michael's mind in the days that followed. He returned to the studio, not as a man basking in praise, but as a teacher more deeply committed than ever. The students received him not with wide-eyed awe, but with subtle, growing reverence. His injury still limited him, but his command of the room had deepened. Even the simplest correction carried more weight now, not because of the attention, but because he had shown them what resilience looked like when it wasn't polished or prepared, but lived. On a chilly Wednesday evening, as he closed the studio with Alyssa, she turned to him and said, "There's something you need to see." She led him down to the front entrance, where a small group had gathered. Outside stood Charles Delaney, dressed in a dark coat, scarf tucked neatly, a broom in hand. Michael froze. "I told you," Alyssa said quietly. He was serious. Charles stepped forward, not smiling, not mocking, just present. He looked at the entrance to the studio, then at Michael. "You said I'd have to keep my promise, that if I lost, I'd clean." Michael said nothing. The silence stretched. "I wasn't planning on doing this publicly," Charles added, "but I realized it would mean more if I did. Not for the cameras, just for the people who were there that night, the ones who saw what really happened." A few students watched from the windows. Some had their phones out, but most didn't. They simply observed. Michael crossed his arms. "You're serious?" Charles nodded. "I made a promise. Time I honored it." Michael stepped aside and opened the door to the studio. Charles entered, broom in hand. The room was already clean, of course, but he began sweeping anyway. Not dramatically, not with flair. Just work, steady, slow, without comment. Alyssa handed him a dustpan. He took it. For nearly 20 minutes, he moved across the floor, picking up invisible debris. Some of the students helped guide him, showing corners. At one point, a woman dropped her water bottle accidentally and bent to pick it up. Charles beat her to it. No one laughed. When he finished, he stood in the center of the room, broom still in hand. He turned to Michael. "I was wrong," he he said plainly. You weren't invisible. I just refused to see. Michael regarded him. You weren't the only one. Charles nodded once, then handed the broom to a nearby student and turned to leave. Just before walking out the door, he paused. You changed something, he said. In me, in that room. I thought I knew what performance meant. I didn't. Then he was gone. Michael stood in the doorway, watching him disappear into the winter fog. Later, as the students filtered out and the lights dimmed, Alyssa joined him by the mirrored wall. You know, she said, he could have done nothing, but he didn't. Michael tilted his head. People like him don't know how to lose, but maybe he learned how to respect what he can't outshine. They stood there for a long time, the hum of the heating system, the only sound between them. Then Michael turned to her. We have a showcase coming up. I know. I want to open it with a student solo. No partner, just movement. Someone who's never performed before. She looked at him, uncertain. You think they're ready? I think they need to know what it feels like to be seen. The way I did. That weekend, the studio hosted a modest winter showcase. Not flashy, not publicized, just students and their families, gathered in folding chairs around the main floor. Michael sat to the side, Alyssa beside him, both watching as a young woman named Renee, a nurse in her 30s, who had taken her first class only months ago, stepped forward and danced her first solo. Her hands trembled. Her feet were far from precise. But when the music swelled and she lifted her arm with a hesitant grace, something shifted in the room. The audience didn't applaud until the final note faded, but when they did, it was honest. Michael watched in silence, the corners of his eyes damp. When it was over, he stood slowly and joined Renee at the edge of the floor. She turned to him, wide-eyed. I messed up the middle, she whispered. I almost forgot to turn. Michael smiled faintly. No one saw that. She blinked. How? Because you never stopped dancing. As the applause faded and the room emptied, Michael stood alone in the center once more, the same way he had many times before. But this time, he wasn't there to remember. He was there to witness something being built, something larger than himself, something that had begun as a broken promise, and now stood fulfilled. Weeks passed, and the cold city thawed slowly into early spring. Slush turned to puddles, bare branches budded, and the skyline softened beneath longer stretches of light. Inside the Brooklyn studio, the routine resumed with subtle changes. The students still arrived with bags slung over their shoulders and shoes tied loosely, but now they came with more questions, more determination, more urgency. They didn't just want to dance, they wanted to grow. Michael noticed a difference, though he never said much. He adjusted his chair less often now, needing it only on particularly bad days. His knee, though not fully recovered, was steadier than it had been in months. But more than that, something in him had stabilized. He no longer feared the silence when the music stopped. He had danced with truth and survived. The rest was just movement. One Thursday evening, just before his intermediate class, Sarah entered the office holding a sleek black folder. You're going to want to sit down for this, she said, her tone unreadable. Michael looked up from the attendance sheet. I'm already sitting. Good, she replied, placing the folder in front of him. Inside was a formal letter, printed on heavy stock, embossed with gold trim. The letterhead read, New York Conservatory for Dance, Board of Directors. He began reading, slowly. Dear Mr. Turner, we were deeply moved by your recent performance at the State Theater and have followed your contributions to the dance community with admiration. We believe that your journey and your current work with non-traditional adult learners reflects the kind of mentorship we value at the Conservatory. It is with great pleasure that we offer you a position as lead instructor of adult programs at our Manhattan campus, beginning this summer. The position is flexible to your current teaching commitments and includes opportunities for curriculum development, cross-disciplinary workshops, and guest collaborations. We believe your voice is one the next generation of dancers needs to hear, not only for your technique, but for your perspective. Sincerely, Daniel Carlson, Artistic Director. Michael sat back in his chair. The studio around him buzzed quietly. A few students chatting, a metronome ticking faintly in the next room. But in his chest, Everything went still. Sarah watched him. "That's real," she said. "They called this morning. Wanted to make sure it got to you in person." He didn't speak, just ran a thumb slowly over the edge of the letter. "They want you," she continued, "not as a guest, as faculty, with full support. I haven't taught in an institution in over 2 decades. They don't care. They see what you've built here, what you've survived." Michael let out a breath. "It's a lot. It's a future," she said. "A real one. And it doesn't mean you have to leave here." They made that clear. Later that night, after the studio had emptied and the lights were dimmed, Michael walked slowly along the edge of the practice floor. Alyssa met him near the back, where she'd been organizing storage shelves. "I heard," she said, closing cabinet. "Congratulations." He nodded. "I don't know if I'm ready for something like that again." "You weren't ready for the gala, or the State Theater, or this studio, really. But you showed up. You always show up." Michael looked around the space. The old mirrors, the worn floorboards, the smell of sweat and wood glue. This place had been his shelter, a haven not from the world, but from the version of himself he'd been afraid to reclaim. And now, that world was knocking again. "What would you do?" he asked. "If I were you," she replied, "I'd go, not to prove anything, just to expand what you already started here." "And what about this place?" "We're not going anywhere," she said. "We'll hold the floor while you build new ones." Michael smiled faintly. "You always say the right thing." "Not always," she said, "but I say the honest thing." He nodded again, slower this time. The decision had already begun to form long before the offer arrived. This was not a departure. It was a continuation. That weekend, he returned to the conservatory for the first time since his injury. The building had changed. New wings, digital sign-ins, modern architecture laced into the old marble bones. But the smell remained the same, a mixture of pine resin from the studio floors and faint traces of resin dust from dancers' shoes. A young woman led him on a tour. Students passed in leotards and sweatshirts, some rehearsing routines in hallways, others discussing choreography with the kind of intensity only art can conjure. He was older now by decades, but no longer an outsider. At the end of the tour, Daniel Carlson met him outside the performance hall. The man was in his 60s, with a slow smile and clear eyes. "We're honored to have you here," Daniel said. "I won't pretend we knew your story fully, not until recently. But what you've built in Brooklyn and what you did on that stage, it was one of the few times in recent memory our faculty stood up after a performance. You didn't just move. You reminded us why movement matters." Michael offered a quiet thank you. Daniel extended a folder. "The contract's in here. No pressure. But if you accept, we'd like you to co-lead the summer intensive. Adults and late starters. Those who've always been told they were too old, too stiff, too far behind." Michael opened the folder, glanced at the terms, then closed it. "I accept." Daniel's face lit up. "Good. Very good." Back in Brooklyn, Michael stood in the center of the studio that evening, watching the beginners class finish their cool-down. When they were done, he addressed them, something he rarely did in full. "I want to tell you something," he said. "There was a time I thought my story ended a long time ago, that there was no place for me in this world anymore. But this room, your effort, your failures, your courage, gave me something back. And now, I have a chance to bring that somewhere new." He paused. "I've been asked to join the conservatory, to teach, to build. I'll still be here, some days, but I'll also be there, helping people who think they've missed their chance, just like I did." One student clapped, then another, then the whole room applauded. Not for the job, but for the man who had stood beside them without pride and now stood before them without apology. That night, as Michael walked home, the city seemed clearer than before. Not brighter, not louder, just more focused. He no longer needed to be seen. He had learned how to see himself. And the world, once narrow and distant, now lay open before him, not as a stage to conquer, but as a path to walk one step at a time. Summer arrived with unexpected ease. By early June, the conservatory's glass doors swung open to welcome a new season of students. not just a wide-eyed teenagers in pristine ballet slippers, but also a growing community of adult learners who walked in with history on their backs and determination in their chests. They came from across the city and beyond. Some had danced in college. Others had never set foot on a studio floor. But all of them, in some way, had been told their time had passed. That was why Michael mattered. He stepped into the conservatory not with the authority of an institution behind him, but with the quiet confidence of a man who had lived the answer to the question they all carried. Is it too late for me? His presence alone challenged the narrative. He wasn't a poster child for resilience. He was its architect, and in that, he gave people permission to begin again. The summer intensive became a kind of sanctuary. Michael co-taught with a younger instructor named Elena, whose energy complemented his calm. Where she pushed their bodies, he grounded their minds. Where she counted beats, he taught them to feel silences. Together, they built something rare, a program that taught technique without demanding perfection, discipline without erasing personality. Meanwhile, back in Brooklyn, the original studio flourished under Alyssa's direction. With Michael commuting to Manhattan several days a week, Alyssa stepped fully into the role of coordinator and lead administrator. She created a scholarship fund for underprivileged adults, organized community dance nights, and even launched a weekend class for absolute beginners over the age of 50. The program quickly filled. Michael returned on Fridays and Sundays, teaching his core group, not because he had to, but because he wanted to. Those sessions were different now, less instructional, more intimate. Students shared more openly. Mistakes became part of the learning ritual, laughter filling the gaps between failed turns and triumphant pivots. One evening, as the summer intensive reached its midpoint, Daniel Carlson called Michael into his office. The meeting was informal, no desk between them, just 2 chairs in a quiet room filled with the smell of wood polish and sunlight filtering through wide windows. "I've been watching your classes," Daniel said, folding his hands. "You're doing more than teaching dance. You're rebuilding people." Michael shrugged slightly. "They're doing that for themselves. I just show them where to start." Daniel smiled. "There's something else." He handed Michael a program draft of Conservatory's annual fall showcase, a prestigious event typically reserved for elite performers or guest choreographers. But this year, something was different. A new section had been added. Legacy works, emerging from silence. Beneath it, a single line, choreography and performance by Michael Turner and ensemble. Michael stared at the paper. "You want me to choreograph a piece?" "Not just choreograph," Daniel said. "We want you to dance. With your ensemble. No pressure. You can decline." Michael leaned back slowly. "When?" "November. You'd have the fall semester to prepare." He didn't respond right away. His mind flickered with images, his knee, the limits of his body, the toll it might take, but also the rhythm that still stirred beneath the surface, persistent, alive. "I'll think about it." He did, for 2 weeks. He kept the program in his bag, unopened but never far from reach. He worked with students, taught classes, walked through rehearsals, and all the while, the idea grew louder. One night, after his Sunday session in Brooklyn, he sat in the empty studio with Alyssa. "They want me to dance again," he said. She looked up from her laptop. "You mean on stage?" "Yes. Not a solo, a piece with students. But I'd be in it." She paused. "Do you want to?" He didn't answer at first. "It would hurt," he admitted. "My knee still flares if I push too hard, and I'd have to modify everything. But there's something about moving in harmony with others, not leading, not proving anything, just moving." "Then say yes," Alyssa said, "not because they asked, but because you have something to say. You always have." He nodded, and for the first time, he didn't feel the weight of a comeback. He felt the pull of contribution. He returned to the conservatory the next day and accepted the offer. Rehearsals began that week. He chose 4 students, all adults, none of them professional, but each one carrying something deep within them. A musician recovering from vocal loss, a former athlete navigating post-injury confidence, a single mother who had never danced in public, and a war veteran rediscovering rhythm as therapy. Michael worked with them slowly, intentionally. The piece wasn't technical. It was emotional. A story told through proximity, stillness, tension, and release. Each dancer contributed ideas. They wrote movement together, layering their truths into the choreography. The piece began with separation, bodies moving in different directions, avoiding one another. Then slowly, over time, the movement brought them closer, not through force, but through choice. The final sequence ended with them all walking side by side, not in perfect unison, but in alignment. He danced sparingly. A few turns, a few gestures, a sequence where he dropped to the floor and rose again, slowly, painfully, but deliberately. The symbolism was obvious, but honest. They rehearsed twice a week. The other faculty watched with quiet curiosity. Some offered help. Others observed from a distance, perhaps unsure what to make of a piece that didn't aim to impress, but to connect. November arrived. The showcase sold out. On the night of performance, Michael stood backstage in simple black rehearsal clothes. No costume, no theatrics, just fabric that moved. His ensemble stood beside him, nervous but ready. Alyssa arrived minutes before curtain, squeezing his hand once in support. When the lights dimmed, they walked onto the stage. The music began, a slow cello progression that grew in layers. The audience watched as the dancers moved in staggered paths. Each sequence pulled them toward one another, only to release again. But over time, they began to hold, to lean, to listen. When Michael entered, his steps slow, measured, the crowd leaned forward, not because they expected a miracle, but because they already understood the weight of his return. The final gesture, as rehearsed, was simple. Michael stood still while the others circled him, touching his shoulders, his hands, acknowledging him without reverence. And then he walked forward. They followed. Together, the lights faded. Silence. Then applause, slow, rising, not explosive, but deep. After the curtain closed, Michael stood behind the scrim, watching his dancers embrace each other. They didn't cheer. They exhaled. Backstage, Daniel found him. "You didn't just perform," he said. "You changed the shape of the night." Michael smiled faintly. "We all did." Later that night, back in Brooklyn, Michael unlocked the studio, turned on one light, and stood alone in the center of the floor. The room was quiet. The city buzzed outside. He took one breath. Then he moved, not for an audience, not for applause, just for the rhythm that had never truly left. Snow had returned to the edges of the sidewalks, soft and silent. The holiday season crept quietly into the city, dressing windows in gold and silver, stringing lights across streets and awnings. For most people, it was a time of closure, of reflection, of gathering. For Michael, it marked 1 year since everything had begun to change. The Grand Haven Event Center sent its invitation by courier. No envelope, no digital RSVP. Just a folded card, cream-colored, with an embossed seal on the front and a single line inside. Michael Turner, Guest of Honor, Winter Arts Gala. There was no preamble, no instructions. Just a time, a date, and an unspoken request: return. He hadn't set foot in the building since Charles Delaney's broom-sweeping gesture nearly a year before. Even then, he had only lingered in the doorway. Now, the invitation offered something else. Not a role, not a challenge, but a presence, a recognition. He thought about it for 2 days. Said nothing to Alyssa. Said even less to Sarah or Daniel. Then, on a quiet Tuesday morning, he called a number printed in tiny gold at the bottom of the card. "I'll be there," he said simply. On the night of the gala, the Grand Haven looked much as it had that first night. Glittering chandeliers, a red carpet stretching out toward waiting cameras, music rising faintly from inside. But to Michael, it no longer felt like a palace of unreachable people. It felt like a place he had once worked, a place that had once tried to bury him. And now, a place where he had earned the right to walk into the front door. He wore a dark tailored suit, not rented, not borrowed, his own. Alyssa walked beside him, her dress understated but elegant, her hair pulled back, her smile calm. They didn't arrive in a limousine. They didn't need to. Recognition doesn't require spectacle. Inside, the atmosphere buzzed with the usual clinking of glasses and curated laughter. But when Michael entered, something shifted. Not everyone recognized him at once, but those who did leaned to their neighbors. Whispers rippled, hands pointed subtly. A few older guests, who had been at the infamous gala last year, approached him with warm words. "Mr. Turner," one woman said, "your performance at the conservatory. I was in the third row. I cried. Thank you." A younger man added, "You've changed the way we talk about age and art in the community. You brought something back we forgot we needed." Michael accepted the compliments with quiet humility, never lingering too long. He wasn't there to bask. He was there to observe, to acknowledge the past and close it properly. Charles Delaney approached near the midpoint of the evening. No cameras followed him this time. No entourage flanked his path. He was dressed in a simple navy tuxedo, a drink in hand, a quiet smile on his lips. "Michael," he said. "Charles." They stood in silence for a moment, not out of discomfort, but out of mutual understanding. The showmanship had been stripped away. What remained was something quieter, more human. "I didn't expect you to accept the invitation," Charles admitted. "I almost didn't. I'm glad you did. This place, it needed your presence tonight." Michael nodded. "It needed truth. You gave it the stage. That counted for something." Charles raised his glass slightly. "No speeches tonight. No jokes. Just gratitude." They parted without drama. As the evening progressed, a small group of dancers performed on the main floor, students from the conservatory, many of whom Michael had taught. Their piece was contemporary, expressive, filled with unrefined beauty. As they finished, the lights shifted subtly, and the event host stepped forward with a microphone. "We want to take a moment to honor someone who, through quiet strength and artistic honesty, reminded us that movement does not belong only to the young or the perfect or the expected. Tonight, we recognize Michael Turner, dancer, teacher, and one of our city's most powerful voices in reclaiming the soul of performance." Applause rose, full and resonant. Michael stood. He didn't walk to the center of the room. He didn't bow. He just placed a hand over his heart and nodded once. That was enough. After the applause faded, the hall slowly returned to its rhythm. But something remained in the air, not tension, not expectation. Reverence. As the gala wound down, Michael found himself near the edge of the ballroom, beside the tall windows overlooking the city. Alyssa joined him, 2 glasses of champagne in hand. "Your name's trending again," she said, offering him one. He chuckled. "I didn't even do anything tonight." "You didn't have to. Just being here was enough." They stood in silence for a moment, watching as snow began to fall, slow and thick. "You know," she said, "this place looks different now." "It does. Not because of the lighting or the people, but because of what happened here. What you didn't let die here." Michael turned to face the room. The same marble floor he had once polished night after night. The same columns he had once stood behind, unseen. Now, people moved around him with awareness. Some nodded, some smiled, some simply made space, but not out of avoidance, out of respect. "I used to wonder," he said, "what would feel like to belong in this room. And now, I don't need to belong to it. I let it become part of the story. That's enough." She smiled, soft and sure. "You've already changed the story for others. They'll remember this." "No," he replied. "They'll remember what they felt. That's better." The final dance of the evening began. A classic waltz. A few couples drifted to the floor. Alyssa looked at him, questioning. "My knee might not forgive me," he said. "It will. Just once." He extended his hand. She took it. They stepped onto the floor, not the center, just the edge. No spotlight followed. No announcement echoed. But people turned anyway. Not to watch. To witness. Michael moved slowly, steadily, not with the force of proving himself, but with the grace of having nothing left to prove. Alyssa followed his lead without hesitation. They didn't dance with perfection. They danced with peace. Around them, others danced too. The room, once defined by excess performance, now glowed with something else, authenticity. And when the music ended, the applause did not come. Instead, the silence returned, but not the kind that comes from absence, the kind that comes from awe. Michael turned to Alyssa and whispered, "This is when a hall truly shines."